Smokey didn't believe what he did was cheating. He was reading between the lines of the rule book. He said if it didn't say you couldn't do it, then it was considered legal.
Smokey Yunick was a legend of the automotive world. He was one part man, one part racetrack demon. For years, he built a reputation around his ingenuity with a wrench and challenging the system. Whether it was finding loopholes in NASCAR or hiding fuel in his frame rail, Smokey just couldn't be fazed. But beyond all that bravado, the drama unfurled behind the closed doors of his garage. And when they opened it, everything changed. What did they find? How much does it say about his legacy? Join us as we discuss the shocking discovery in Smokey's garage. The birth of a legendary engine genius. Smokey Yunick's best damn garage in town is finally under some scrutiny. And gearheads might finally find out what made him so special in the first place. But before a deep dive into his legendary lair, it is worth asking the question, who exactly was Smokey Yunick? And how exactly does anyone wind up with the name Smokey? Born Henry Yunick on May 25, 1923, to an Ukrainian immigrant, he grew up on a farm in Neshaminy Falls, Pennsylvania, where he learned to deal with the demands of maintaining engines daily and keeping them functional. But how did a farm develop a sudden affinity for cars and engines? It all started with the unexpected death of his father when he was just a 16-year-old kid. He had two choices: stay in school throughout high school and figure it all out later, or make sure his father's farm and legacy live on for life. He chose the latter. And that was the prologue of his journey into the world of engines, mechanics, and automobiles. For context, he constructed a tractor from scratch, using the remains of some car junks. Not many gearheads have the ability to really create life from pieces of scrap, as he did. But it wasn't just tractors. As long as it runs on wheels and is powered by an engine, Smokey could figure out whatever puzzle came from it. In his spare time on the farm, he turned a little bit away from tractors. He wanted a career in the world of racing, whether it was building them, fixing them as a mechanic, or simply racing on the tracks. So he began a short-lived career in motorbike racing. And more impressively, he built the motorcycle he was racing in by himself. But sometimes fate writes its most impressive jokes under the guise of ambition. He was a young, ambitious mechanic trying his hand at something new. Maybe he expected a few complications. He sure didn't think they would stick for life. While the race went on, his bike was smoking so heavily. And every time the commentator needed to refer to him, especially when he seemed to be doing so well in the race, he just called him Smokey. And just like that, Smokey was born. The name stuck, but his motorbike racing career did not. Instead, he focused on his greatest skill, being a mechanic. And that's when everything changed. From war hero to mechanic. After his first few experiments with tractors and motorbikes, the white and red stripes of America came calling, and he joined the Second World War in the early 40s. Somehow, the name Smokey seemed to follow him even into the Army. He piloted a B-17 Flying Fortress in the Army Air Corps named Smokey and His Firemen, raining fire throughout Europe in over 50 missions. In training missions, he often flew over Daytona Beach, Florida. And for the first time, he felt like a certain place was calling to him. Florida was always an auto city, with some of the biggest flagship auto shops constructing and rebuilding American muscle. Right after his service in the Army, he got married and finally moved to Daytona Beach. His dream to dominate the automotive world was well and truly still in place. But he had no plans to work his magic with the engines while taking orders from anyone. He wanted to work at his own pace, create his own engines, and build his cars in his own image. In Florida, he knew he had some serious competition. It won't be easy to take over the automotive space, but a man who lost his father at 16 and fought and got drafted into the Army at the age of 19 definitely knows a thing or two about resilience. So in the midst of the competition and uncertainty, he scoped out the competition and figured out a common pattern. Among the auto shops, there were some really cool names, and they had slogans and catchphrases that would get any car enthusiast's head spinning. He had two choices: beat them or join them. But he has always had one dream: being at the very top of the automotive food chain. So to him, there was no joining them. The whole point of creating his own garage and scoping out the competition was to find ways to beat them. He had no intention to shift away from that. So in 1947, he opened a garage at 957 North Beach Street in Daytona Beach, just at the automotive heart of Florida. And he gave it the most smoky name ever: the best damn garage in town. It wasn't just a name for the auto shop, it was a challenge, an announcement of a competition for the other garages in Daytona, Florida. But here is the real kicker. Smokey was as smart as he was competitive. On the outside, he was mostly repairing trucks and reconstructing cool automotive designs from pieces of junked cars. But the auto shop was more than a garage where he repaired trucks. He rarely gave anyone access to some parts of it, almost like he had some secret to hide. But what was he really building in there? Clients often whispered speculations about the inventions that went on in the garage, but nothing really stuck. However, as the rumors swirled and speculations grew, Smokey made his first real break in the racing world, and no one anticipated it. Smokey's first dance with NASCAR. It did not take long before Smokey became a force to reckon with in Florida's automotive space. From mechanics to racers and gearheads, everyone wanted a piece of Daytona's latest car genius. But in their struggle for his attention, local racing figure Marshall Teague stole the march on everyone else. News of a young mechanic with a Midas touch on the engines had Marshall off his feet. He was in the business of stock car racing anyway, meaning that he could use every help he could get. The early 50s saw the birth of some of the greatest engines and alterations made to race cars just to win. And if Smokey could contribute somehow, Marshall wanted him. But here was one small problem. Smokey wasn't exactly a stock car genius. He hadn't really dealt with stock car racing before that time, but he knew engines, and that was just about enough for Marshall. While Smokey rarely had any ideas on how to make things work on stock cars, it did not take him that long to get up to speed. Fast forward a few months into his recruitment with Marshall, he was in charge of preparing the race cars for some of the biggest drivers in Marshall's lineup. He prepared a Hudson Hornet for Herb Thomas in the second running of the Southern 500 in Darlington, South Carolina. And that's when everything changed. Not only did Herb win the race, but he also made a statement on the track. The racing world had never seen anything like it. The Hudson Hornet had immediately drawn some serious attention, but so did its mechanic. Smokey had finally slipped into the stock car racing world, and he was there to stay. Although the world of race cars was always evolving with new engineers and building geniuses spawning out of every corner, Sneaky wasn't fazed. He had more than 1 million aces up his sleeve, but he often played it close to his vest. Fans speculated that most of his top creations were built in his garage, away from prying eyes. The 50s were a completely different era when it came to copyright protections. Other car manufacturers literally took pictures and snapshots of later innovations by other companies with no real punishment. Legends of car racing games like A.J. Watson, the famous Indianapolis 500 car builder, had a lot of his designs, especially the engines of his roadsters, rebuilt and copied. While he did sell some of his plans, others were just downright copied with no consequences. But that's not the kind of win he was looking for. He wanted to be at the top of the food chain, so a little bit of secrecy was his go-to plan. But how well did that work for him? During the Indy 500 race, he built a custom reverse torque special car. It was a radical push for stability. The Indy 500 racetracks were oval-shaped, meaning that they often turned to the left. So he considered changing the way the engines spin in the opposite direction and leveraging that friction to create a more stable handle for whoever drove his car whenever they tried to negotiate a bend on the oval tracks. And just like that, the young mechanic won 2 different stock car races as a builder. But everything changed in 2001 when Smokey died, and the world wanted a look into that garage that changed the racing world. The garage that changed everything. After Smokey died in 2001 from leukemia, gearheads mourned him, and the world of motorsports racing etched his name into the asphalt forever. But even when he was alive, fans of the sport mostly considered him secretive. Although the reports were unconfirmed, it did not stop speculation about the life he lived behind the scenes. Fans speculated about the possibility that he really planned a takeover of the motorsports world. Some reported that he designed prototypes that would have taken the racetracks by storm, but never really got the chance to exhibit them. However, he never got the chance to confirm or deny having any such designs in his garage. But fans found something disturbing about some of Smokey's comments. By Offrey, he died. Insiders claimed that the engine genius did not want his garage converted into a museum after he died. Odd, isn't it? Already, he was a kingpin in the auto world. So why avoid having his garage displayed for the next generation? Could he be hiding something? Fast forward to February 2004. His daughter Trish Yunick Brown, the president of Carbon Press, opened up the shop to gearheads. They sought answers as to why her father did not allow the shop to be turned into a museum. She claimed that Smokey would prefer to have all of his equipment and car parts auctioned for sale to motorheads than have them sit coolly in the garage, waiting for someone to come look at them. Although he was dead, he made sure that parts of him remained on the asphalt forever, rather than taking dust on the workbench in his garage. While it appears that he really preferred not to keep his equipment hidden, there are other things he never shared. Following his demise, every evening on Saturday between 5 and 9 p.m., his daughter, Trish, opened up the garage to his fans for a tour, giving every gearhead the chance to see some of the things that he worked on all by himself. Before the building eventually burned down in 2011, rumors swirled around the findings in the garage. While the sources were unconfirmed, they speculated that he had prototypes of water-fueled engines. According to the sources, he had made them for no particular car company. Instead, he created them for himself and was willing to sell to the highest bidder. But he didn't stop at water-based engines. The same sources claimed to have found a secret door in his personal garage, with a rough sketch of an engine prototype that could simply run on paper. Just imagine a world where cars could run without gasoline, but water and paper. Maybe he indeed was on the cusp of greatness. But perhaps the experimental engine prototypes were the most important discovery. Maybe that was just a glance at the legacy he was leaving behind. Whether it was a revolutionary engine or bending the rules of the game, when there was a challenge, he just solved it. And nowhere was that more obvious than his mini-wars against NASCAR's rulebook. Smokey's war against the rulebook. In the world of cars and engines, no name is any bigger than Smokey Yunick's. He was not only a menace with a wrench, he knew how to get under NASCAR's skin. Before he died of leukemia at the age of 77, he had his fair share of cat-and-mouse games with the car racing body. For context, he used creative methods to circumvent some of the most disturbing NASCAR rules at the time. with popular inventions like the 7/8 1966 Chevy Chevelle. During the Daytona 500, Smokey built a Chevrolet Chevelle, which he reportedly scaled down to a smaller size than the standard NASCAR requirement. The difference was not particularly obvious when anyone looked at the car, but it made a massive difference during a race, especially because he could simply punch a smaller hole in the air, granting him significantly higher straight-line speeds. However, Smokey never considered it cheating. For him, if the rules weren't seriously enforced, then he wasn't breaking them. But speed wasn't the only reason he bent the rules now, was it? Most racing bodies often gave rather strict fuel capacity rules to force a refill during races. It was the standard rule, but when it came to Smokey, rules existed mainly to be broken, or at least bent for convenience. So, whenever he was preparing a car for the race, he would simply add a basketball to the fuel tank to take up some space before it was fueled. After the inspectors filled the oversized tank, they assumed it was filled with the legal amount of fuel. Then he sneakily deflated the ball and added more fuel to fill his oversized tank, leaving his driver with more fuel for a race. The implications were subtle, but they won him races. For context, the driver took little time for a refill, spending less time than other drivers during a pit stop. Oftentimes, after the races, the inspectors checked his car again and measured just to be sure, but no one ever really figured him out. However, when NASCAR fully regulated the rules on the fuel tank sizes, Smokey found another loophole in their rule, and he exploited it yet again. In his garage, he installed the perfect-sized fuel tank with no basketball in it. But he figured out that NASCAR made no rules about the size of the fuel line. So he made a fuel line that was 2 inches wide and 11 feet long, holding an extra 5 gallons of gasoline, making most of the difference on the tracks. The legacy of a rebel genius. Caught between being a rule bender and a self-taught mechanic genius, Smokey's legacy still remains up in the air for most of his fans. Although he was just as much a rebel as he was a genius, his racing career brought him into contact with some of the biggest representatives of the automotive industry. For context, huge automotive companies like Chevrolet, Ford, and even Pontiac officially employed him as a point man during races. Much of the high-performance development of the Chevrolet small-block engine involved either him as its designer, a tester, or both. Smokey raced Chevrolets in 1955 and 1956, Fords in 1957 and 1958, and Pontiacs from 1959 through 1963. His only loyalty was to the asphalt. He never really minded moving from one corporation to the other. Why was he so fluid with his brand loyalty? While fans barely had an answer to some of the decisions he made, one thing was certain. He was an overachiever, and even if it meant that he shifted between brands to get what he wanted, he was more than willing to do it. But his greatest achievements did not particularly surface until his deal with Pontiac. Smokey became the first team owner to win the Daytona 500 twice, in 1961 and 1962, with Pontiac as his lead car. But that wasn't all. Smokey wasn't just building cars that could win races. He was, in fact, building machines that could compete at the pole positions before the green flag is dropped. For context, before every race, drivers of each car are forced into a race. Although whoever wins that race is allowed to start from pole position on race day, it does not always determine the winner. But that wasn't a common truth with Smokey. For a fact, he was the first to put a driver, his close friend Fireball Roberts, in the pole position 3 consecutive years between 1960 and 1962, and he made sure they won the race. Basically, he was Pontiac's loaded gun pointed at the heart and reputation of Chrysler, Ford, and even the Chevrolets. Somehow, he just never fully operated on the side of the box. Often, he colored outside the lines and refused to accept that something couldn't be done just because some relevant body made rules to assure it. But whether the fans of the motorsport remember Smokey as a rebel or a mad genius, one thing was certain: no one quite handled the asphalt games quite like he did. Do you think Smokey was a rebel, a genius, or both? Is there a chance that motorsport fans ever see another Smokey Yunick? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.